Yeah, she's a very private person.
Yeah, she went to like the big events, and she would be by his side and go to the dinners and whatnot. There's actually, I was looking at through the records, and there's a picture of Wilson and his wife and the other Prime Minister, Harold, and his wife, Harold Holt, at an event. So it was like, wait, which one are we talking about here?
I love it. Yeah, don't lose that picture, by the way.
Thankfully, it was on the internet.
Was it? You
okay,
can find it
good.
again? Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But you know, the problem with this theory is it's a little late to make a career change because your wife wants you to, because he had that 30-some years prior to have come to that decision.
Well, but there's also the point of, like, he was prime minister for 6 years, right?
Yeah.
And then they lost. That would have been a really great time if his wife had been, like, not into the whole politician thing, that she could have said, okay, great, you've done it, right? You've kind of seen this thing through. You've led your party for 6 years. You did a really good job. It's time to just take a step back.
Maybe she would have done that, yeah.
And then that's when, like, for me, that's when I would have done it, right? And that's when I think the logical time for something like that is not 2 years after you've become prime minister again, in my mind. So I agree. I don't think this theory is good.
Yeah, this could have been a factor. I don't think it's the all-encompassing theory, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It might have been a factor in his thinking.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
I think a lot of the stuff that is our theories, not all of them, but a lot of them could very easily have been simply contributing factors.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, and he was in office for how long?
45 to 76
so
with a
31
4-year
years.
break. Well, no,
he was in office the entire
serving.
time. He was
so,
the head of the
yeah,
party.
it's 31 years.
That's a long time to do something that your wife hates and to finally give in.
It's
You know?
exactly my
Kinda
point.
is.
Yeah.
I don't
Like,
get.
if
I don't
Steve-
get away with doing anything for
I was just
a
gonna
week.
say, if you were
That
doing
might-
something that your wife hated, would you get 31 years out of it,
Probably
or would you
not.
be like, okay, I've done this for 10, that was fun.
I don't, well, then again, I am still podcasting, so.
She doesn't hate the podcast.
Yeah, you know, she didn't even like 10 Downing Street.
Yeah.
When he won again in '74, they didn't even move back into it because she really didn't like it. She thought it was a crappy little apartment. So yeah, no 10 Downing for her. Let's get to our next one here, and this is the reason is the pressure of the whole thing. Reportedly, at the time, he was drinking like during the day because his job was so stressful for him.
Understandable.
Yeah, and his wife, again, Mary, said, this is the one interview she gave, said, quote, he'd had enough. There was a seaman strike, which he had just dealt with. He told me that he could not deal with it with the same level of energy and the same zest, and possibly he began to feel that his memory was going, unquote. That's what his wife said. Apparently, he just wasn't as enthusiastic about it as he used to be. Go figure.
Well, we gotta jump back here a second though and say, look at what was going on in the world at the time, both prior to and then during the time that he was serving his second stint. I mean, we're looking at the late 60s, things are getting kind of dicey. The early 70s, things are starting to fall apart economically for Britain. There's stagflation going on. The unemployment rate is rising. They've got, what was it? It was 3 or 4 states of emergency were called in that 4 years, which, you know, is just astronomical because it didn't happen very often. Reduced work weeks, so people weren't making money. I mean, like, it was all kinds of social and economic things that were just going wrong left, right, and center.
Yeah,
it was constant crisis.
Yeah, especially in the mid-'70s, with the rise of OPEC and the sudden shoot up in oil prices. That damaged a lot of Western economies. It took us a long time to get out of that. So it wasn't just Britain, but sure they were harder hit than us because we at least produced some oil. I mean, I guess they produced some from the North Sea, but they're not the big oil.
Well, it hadn't really come online.
No,
So that was the hard part.
That's a good point. Yeah.
The North Sea oil really didn't come in until the very end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. That was one of the things that really helped Thatcher out. Is that there was that economic boom just after she came in because the wells started really producing.
Well, let's hear it for oil wells, I guess. Yeah. Possible. Let's drill some more.
Let's dig for some coal.
Yeah, coal too, a little coal. But you can see how the pressure of being the prime minister would just sort of wear on you. It's pretty exciting and glamorous for a while and all that power and everything, but after a while it probably does wear you down. And so the reason I like this theory is that he didn't want to admit when he was resigning. He didn't want to say that, well, hey, I'm just a big weenie and I can't take the pressure anymore. You're not going to say that. You're not going to say, oh my God, I just can't take it. So maybe that's why he said he didn't resign, or wouldn't say why he resigned.
I mean, it's a little early in the game to bring this up, but I wonder about a lot of times when there's the resignation, it's a resignation in order to put your favorite in the spotlight so that when the next election comes up, they're the incumbent and therefore they have a better chance of getting elected. And it just suddenly struck me as we're talking about it, like, wait, he didn't do that. No wonder people are so confused by the whole, I'm out of here, thanks a lot, see you later.
Yeah, I don't think he had a preferred success. And I mean, Jesus, Harold, you really could have cleared a few things up and spared us a lot of speculating.
Jeez, man.
Yeah, so the pressure, that's another one. I think, maybe combined with the wife that was unhappy, and everything else, maybe decided to just screw it. I don't know.
So what do we got next?
Well, there's another theory. Yeah, this is popular, actually, which is Alzheimer's disease, which is eventually what did kill him, unfortunately. He died in 1995, 19 years after he resigned.
He was, in his early 80s when he passed?
Was he that old? Let me think.
No,
he wasn't that old.
In the 20s, I think.
He retired at around, 60, I think, and so 19 years later, I guess he's around 80.
Okay.
Yeah, close to it, late 70s, early 80s.
I had it written down somewhere in my notes, and I don't see it at all, so I evidently didn't really write it down.
Yeah. It's been speculated that Wilson was already experiencing symptoms of it, and as he saw that his memory was going, and he was just kind of losing it a little bit.
That seems
But
like it would have been early.
That's really early because
I feel like Alzheimer's takes not so long to really.
It's pretty rare that it takes more than 8. I mean, typically it's like 8 to 10 years after diagnosis, and so between the time when symptoms appear, you finally go see a doctor and they make a diagnosis. It's usually less than 3 years. So
3 years for what? Death?
Between the time that you experience the first symptoms, but you don't realize exactly what it is. And by the time you finally go to the doctor and get it diagnosed, usually, less than 3 years has gone by, typically.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the early symptoms can be really subtle, and I was reading some stuff about early onset that because there's the two derivative or two types. There's the early onset, which is anyone under 65, and then just standard anyone over 65. And there was a study of this family that's got the gene for it. They're just genetically disposed to have it.
Great.
And
I bet they're happy about that. Yeah.
But there's known changes that happen in the brain. And so they've been tracking this family, but they're seeing the beginnings of some of those changes happen as early as 18 or 20 years of age.
Are we talking something that would be noticeable to
changes
somebody?
In the brain, not noticeable exhibited symptoms, but the changes in the brain that then get the ball rolling.
Okay.
So it's possible that we may not know how to diagnose it, but people who are feeling the very, very beginnings of this, the anxiety and forgetfulness and things like that come in the very early stages. I mean, I don't know that they all occur at the same rate. In other words, everybody experiences Alzheimer's at the same progression of symptoms.
I think that's accurate, but I think what Joe is saying is that usually when people are starting to see the first symptoms, right, by the time they've been experiencing those symptoms for about 3 years, they go to the doctor. Because I would. I mean, I think most reasonable human beings.
Remember, this is the 70s, though.
Right, but I'm just saying that typically, right, when you start to exhibit symptoms of that nature, you're going to go to the doctor. Or you're at least going to mention to your doctor on your whatever exam that you do, hey, I've been noticing I'm a little forgetful. And that's not a solid number, right? I mean, 3 years isn't like everybody gets diagnosed within their first 3 years.
In fact, I'm guessing that he probably had much more intensive medical care than most of us get, being PM. He probably saw his doctor a lot more often, was checked out, so he might have been diagnosed fairly early.
And I agree with you that probably there was a lot of stuff, especially if he was prime minister, like the early onset symptoms of kind of anxiety and forgetfulness. Those are things that you would kind of expect.
Lack of focus,
anyway, if you're super stressed out and busy all the time. So there's certainly some wiggle room there. But for him to have Alzheimer's, at that time and then survive for another 20-ish years.
That's unusual.
That's the unusual part,
That's
right?
statistically not so likely. I mean, it happens.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, statistically is one thing. What we see people do sometimes is dramatically different.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think so too. But
I mean, it could have also been the beginnings of he may have had some early forms of dementia that, and then it progressed into, I mean, I'm making a guess at that. I'm by no means versed in exactly how all the symptoms work.
Do we know when he was actually diagnosed with Alzheimer's?
No, to be honest, I don't know that. Yeah,
I've never seen it listed.
No,
well, I mean, that's a private thing. You don't have to.
Yeah, I mean,
you don't have to say, and this doctor says it.
I feel like it was in the early 80s for some reason. So about, less than a decade after he left office.
Yeah, and that's what I was projecting here based on when he died was a diagnosis, or actually onset around 82, diagnosis around 85, somewhere around there. Statistically speaking, that's about when it should have happened.
Okay.
So
that would explain why, if he's I've always been so sharp. I know everything. I'm on top of it. I know everybody's name. Suddenly I can't focus. I don't know anything, and I am just so beat. I can't do this. And sometimes I wonder if that's a dedication to the job factor.
Well, yeah,
I can't do this job like I think I should.
Yeah. And Mary did say that his memory was kind of going.
Yeah,
right?
She did say that. But again, he was around 60. That might just be normal memory loss due to aging.
I don't know. You tell us, Joe.
Hey, just so our fans know, I'm not 60. All the drinking probably wasn't helping either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
And stress, of course, can cause memory loss.
Do we know how much he was actually drinking?
Not really. No.
See, that's the problem.
I don't
with,
think he was
with
coming home
like
plowed.
That.
Yeah.
He might have in the middle of the day said, "You know what? Pour me a glass. I'm going to have a glass with my lunch because I need to calm down."
And this was, what was this, the 70s?
Yeah.
I mean,
liquid lunch was a normal thing.
Yeah.
It was a lot more common back in those days.
It really was.
Yeah, I know.
I remember.
You remember? I know you're that old. Yeah.
I remember you got written up for it recently too. What? I was just bringing it back.
What? Just reviving it. Well, I know women couldn't work in the office then. It's fine. We're kind of doing part of it. It's fine.
That's right. The 70s. Back to the theory though. Anyway, Alzheimer's.
Oh, right. We were talking about Alzheimer's.
I forgot.
What's my name? Yeah. The pro part of this theory that I like, it might explain why Wilson didn't say why he was resigning, because he didn't want to tell the world about his disease, which is kind of understandable.
Or what he suspected could be his disease. Yeah.
Yeah, it's understandable. I mean, yeah. Don't even need to explain why.
Well, and Mary took care of him the whole time. It's not like, except for at the very, very, very end, that he went anywhere for care. So they tried to keep it at home and contained as much as possible.
Yeah. Although he was actually going to Parliament and stuff, even though he was kind of gone, but he still wanted to go, and so everybody at that time knew.
I guess for me, there's not like so much of a reason to not say like I'm stepping down due to health reasons. That's a thing you see politicians in America do all the time, and we might even be even more prideful than people in the UK, and that there's no reason to hide that. There may be a reason to hide your specific diagnosis, but there's no shame in saying I need to take a step down due to illness or for my health or whatever.
No, there is no. Yeah.
There's tons of precedents for it. There's tons of people have done it in the past, and
I know. Typically, when a politician, at least here in America, says, I'm resigning my job for health reasons, or I'm resigning to spend time with my family, that means he got caught having sex with one of the congressional pages or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's a fine line.
So maybe in Britain
reason.
it means something different. I don't know. But that's what
he
it means in America.
Didn't say he was hiking the Appalachian Trail, so I don't know.
Yeah. Of course, the con part of this whole theory about Alzheimer's is, as I said earlier, statistically unlikely. His memory loss was explainable by other things. And also, that interview that I mentioned in 2007 with Mary Wilson, she said they didn't move back into 10 Downing Street, as I said, after the 1974 election, because, quote, we knew that even if we moved, we wouldn't be in Downing Street for long, unquote. Which sounds to me like maybe Wilson's planning his resignation maybe even as early as 1974.
It's possible.
Sounds like he told his wife that, hey, I know it sucks, I know you hate it, We're back here. I won't stay more than a year and a half.
Again, I find that weird because if he knew that he wasn't going to do it, I guess that sometimes there's the line of I'm going to further the party versus I'm going to do what I should do for myself. Because I personally would be like, let's get my second, pick somebody else who I think can do at least a passable job and make them the head of the party when as this election's going on, so that I don't put myself and the country in that position. But I don't know. I'm making it up, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and after he left, the country didn't spiral out of control. They're still there so far. So, I guess somebody reasonably decent succeeded him. So, hey, there we go. And who did succeed him?
Oh, you mean who took over when he resigned?
Yeah.
His successor to the professor.
Yeah.
James Callahan.
Yeah, because he's the one who then lost to Thatcher.
I know.
Good trivia. Yeah.
I'm smart. Shut up.
You're damn good. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our next theory. There's so many good theories in this one. Which was a blackmail/smear campaign. Apparently, Wilson said more than once that he felt that MI5 was out to get him. And he might have had a point, but we'll talk about that later. Because it turns out there may have been another intelligence service that was also out to get him. And this is according to a 2015 article. Apparently Wilson was supposedly obsessed by the possibility that the South African intelligence service was out to smear him and other anti-apartheid politicians. Let's recall, this was the mid-'70s. It was still white rule in South Africa. Yep. And there had been a sex scandal involving a British MP named Jeremy Thorpe.
Yeah.
Who,
the Thorpe affair, it's commonly referred to?
Yeah, and he had committed a quote-unquote indiscretion with a male model named Norman Scott. And he had been paying hush money to the model, Norman Scott.
For about a decade.
Yeah, from party funds. And when it finally, and Scott basically outed him. It wasn't the South African intelligence service, but Scott basically was the guy who sold it to the papers and sold his buddy down the river. And of course, when that came out in the papers, it was a little damaging to Jeremy Thorpe's career, as you can imagine.
Oh yeah. Now, which side was Thorpe on? He was
in the Liberal Party.
Okay, so he was in the same party.
Yeah, he was not Labor, Liberal.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
They both start with an L.
That's hard.
That's close enough. We'll just say they're the same. Yeah. But
we're going to get so many emails about that.
I know. All you Brits, come on. We know everything about Britain. In fact, I have ancestors.
We came from there. We
know. We know all about it. Wilson was convinced that the SAIS, that's South African Intelligence Service, was behind the entire thing. And the upshot of this article that was published last year was that Wilson left before SAIS could do the same thing to him. Yeah. That implies, of course, that he had at least one skeleton in his closet.
Who doesn't?
Exactly. But there really actually never was any proof that the South Africans were involved in the Thorpe scandal at all, because, Norman Scott was really kind of shopping the story around. He was the guy that actually...
Well, he kept going back to Thorpe, and Thorpe kept running around and being a ding-dong about it and trying to shut him up.
Reportedly he even tried to get him murdered.
Yeah, that's one of the things that brought it out is they hired... He went through somebody else who then hired a hitman. All the hitman ended up doing was shooting his dog.
Oh no!
And that's the only casualty in this story was the dog.
That reminds me of a fish called Wanda. Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah, great movie. John Cleese.
Of course, this article again was in the Daily Mail, so I'm not sure. Yeah, I know. So I'm
going to file
sure.
that under.
Yeah, fun theory. There's another theory actually that's got a bit more legs to it. It's actually a lot better documented.
It looks like here that you've accidentally typed the same thing twice, Joe, because the theory name is the same.
Another smear campaign? Yeah, pretty close. I said before that Wilson thought MI5 was out to get him, and this is true. The Daily Mail might say that Wilson thought the SAIS was out to get him. We don't know if that's true or not, but for sure, Wilson did say MI5 was out to get him.
Well, he knew it, though. He knew he had been investigated.
Oh
yeah.
I'm sorry. I I thought you were saying it was true that the entire organization of MI5 was out to get him.
Not
that
entirely.
it was true that Wilson thought
It's
that
a Born
MI5
Identity kind of thing
was
where
getting
they're
at.
chasing him across.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I was confused.
But yeah, it wasn't the entire organization. It was
But
just
some of them were.
Yeah, certain
Okay.
people within the organization.
Okay.
So a certain number of MI5 officers didn't particularly like Wilson. They were suspicious of all of his associations with various Eastern European types. And he used to actually do business in Europe. He traveled in Russia a lot, in Eastern Europe, and he had a lot of contacts, and he had some pretty good friends and stuff who were Eastern European emigres. And in his book Spycatcher, which I'll talk about again in a little bit, but Peter Wright published a book called Spycatcher in 1987, which was his memoir of his time in MI5.
Yeah.
Yeah, good book. And he talks about this briefly because he was approached by a number of MI5 officers who wanted him to join with them in leaking salacious material to the press regarding Wilson and the Labour Party because there was an election coming up. And this is a little bit frustrating thing about Spycatcher is he's not great always about putting the dates in of when certain events happened.
Peter
Wright.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm guessing this was before the 74 election because he said it was close to his retirement. So that would have been 74, I think. And certainly MI5 was a lot more likely to have dirt on Wilson than South Africa, you think? Peter Wright briefly considered joining the cabal against Wilson, but then he finally decided against it because he was nearing the end of his career and he didn't want to jeopardize his pension.
Smart
move. And actually, he kind of had a grudge against MI5 because he spent the earliest part of his career with the Admiralty, and MI5 lured him away, and he said, well, I'm going to be leaving behind like 15 years of accumulated pension if I do that. And they said, not a problem, we'll make you whole. Of course, in the end, they didn't.
Of course not.
So he got a crappy pension, a really crappy pension, which is one of the reasons he wrote Spycatcher. It was revenge, and he wanted the money. But it doesn't appear the MI5 conspiracy was all that successful. Obviously, Wilson wasn't kept out of office. Part of the reason probably is they needed Wright in on the plot because he was pretty high level, and I'm sure he had access to a lot juicier material than a lot of them did. So they didn't get a lot of traction. But another mystery is how Wilson found out, and I won't go too deep into that, but my candidate for this one is Maurice Oldfield, who was the head of the MI6. You've heard of MI6, right? Of course.
Yeah, he's cousin to the guy in MI7, right?
Yeah, no.
I don't even know how many MIs there are at this
Oh,
point.
God, it's complicated. And there's F branch, D branch, C branch,
Oh, my
G
God.
branch. I mean, oh, my God, there's all kinds of stuff. But-
Impossible branch.
Yeah, Maurice Oldfield, and MI5, by the way, and MI6, they didn't collaborate exactly. They were actually kind of not on great terms. There was
A bit like the CIA and the FBI and the
kind of like
ATF at
that.
times.
Yeah.
Kind of like that. But apparently he'd become aware of it somehow. Peter Wright wrote in his book that he had dinner with Oldfield at sometime after the fact, and that Oldfield kept hinting about the whole thing, the little plot against Wilson and stuff, kept dropping little hints about it. And finally, Wright came clean with him, and Oldfield suggested that Wright should make a full report to his superiors. But it appears that Oldfield was already aware of the plot before then, and he had a fairly decent relationship, at least at that time, with Wilson. So he must have been the guy that ratted him out, I'm guessing. But he could have found out from other places. But I like the Oldfield theory. So the question is, of course, did all this plotting cause Wilson to resign early? What do you guys think?
No.
Yeah?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, no, I don't.
Yeah.
MI5 had been investigating Wilson since probably about 1950.
Yeah, they have.
Multiple times. So it's yet one more MI5 investigation. Oh, you're snooping around my garbage can again. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
See you next week, same time, boys.
I know.
Trash comes at this time.
Yeah, I know. So the MI5 thing is like, well, the MI5 pops up again in the theory section now.
I thought we were in theories.
Yeah, later on in the theory section.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't think so. In the absence of that, it doesn't look to me like they got any dirt on him, at least in terms of scandalous materials that they could use to discredit him or embarrass him or get him out of office. So no reason to really, I think Wilson was actually a fairly upright guy. I don't know that there was much in the way of, sex scandals and stuff like that on the guy.
Yeah.
Although there was one sex scandal, which is our next theory, which is his longtime secretary, Marsha Williams, who eventually became Lady Falkender. That was one of the criticisms of Wilson, is that he handed out peerages and things like that to way too many of his buddies.
Yeah.
He did, including to his secretary. She became Lady Falkender eventually.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, prior to that, the ability to hand out peerages sat with the, is it the senior whip?
I don't remember. I don't know.
Is that the correct word? Is it the senior whip? I can't remember the name of that title, but that was the person who could do it, and then he took it from them and took it and kept it for himself as soon as he, came into power.
Yeah, and so that's.
Isn't the whip just the leader of the party? No, he's under the leader of the party.
Under the leader of the party to enforce or help encourage other members of the party to follow the party.
Yeah, because I watch House of Cards, so I know what the whip is.
I only know it because I had to read about it today because I never understood. I was like, there's a dude running around Congress with a whip?
No.
Why have I never seen this?
No.
I think some of
He
them
is
should be
the
whipped.
whip.
Oh, where are we at here?
Very beginning of this theory.
Yeah, okay. There have long been rumors about an affair between Marshall Williams, his secretary, and so, of course, it's thought again, somebody got the goods on Harold, and he retired rather than face a scandal.
Like, there's always that, though, isn't there?
Well, they were out there anyway. I mean, if somebody had actually gotten the goods on him, people would have been like, ho-hum. I mean, people have been murmuring about this behind his back for years, and so...
to be honest, where I think this came from is the fact that I think Marcia had a lot of sway over him.
She did.
She didn't, not necessarily because they were doing the deed, but she just had a lot of sway, and it, from some of the things that I've read, gave me the impression that she was part of the reason that he was handing out so many peerages, and then she was also leaning on other people in the party to do things, whether they were what Wilson wanted to have done or not. So it seems like she was just the kind of person who would go out and say, you need to do this, and keep pushing on it. Because there was somebody who was saying, I only did it because of that girl, Marcia. I remember there's a quote of that somewhere.
Yeah, apparently she was a strong-willed lady.
Yes.
That's putting it one way. Mm-hmm. Other people have had less flattering things to say.
Well, for me, I guess, when I see assistant, I think a lot of people think like, oh, executive assistant or, administrative assistant. That's just like you just file paperwork and whatever.
And make coffee.
But in reality, executive assistant positions and assistant positions like this are typically like that person when they're gone. And it's totally possible in my mind that his assistant was in fact one of his most trusted advisors.
Well, in this case, she wasn't. She was called the secretary. She probably really was more like chief of staff.
Yeah, I mean, she really probably ran a lot of his stuff.
Yeah, that can be a pretty powerful position.
It can, and if you can, foster that trust with someone, you can become a really close advisor. And so for me, it's not so suspicious that he had a crazy close relationship with her and all of that stuff.
But they still were diddling.
She then exhibited power.
Right.
Or not exhibited power.
Exerted?
Exerted, thank you. Yeah. I'm always doing the wrong word. But yeah, exerted power that sometimes might have been a little bit outside of the bounds of what she should have been doing.
Or maybe just influence. Just influence.
Yeah.
You don't have to have power, you just have to have the influence over the power.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So anyway, another theory, the only thing I can say against that one is entirely possible if you work with somebody for decades and, often, sooner or later something happens. It happens. But on the other hand, Mary Wilson was best buds with her for many, many years. Yeah, and that is, of course, Harold Wilson's wife, and they were besties for a long, long time before and after his death.
That has not stopped many people from committing the adultery. Still being the best friend, and then still being the best friend to the spouse.
Well, there's other situations there, right? I mean, there's certainly the situation of, giving permission, like saying, I know that I'm not doing whatever for you, or, whatever. So
that kind of open relationship
scenario, but there's also the possibility that maybe Mary Wilson was a lesbian and so was his assistant, and they were more than best friends. It's sort of like Eleanor Roosevelt situation here.
Hey, there you go. I like that. That's a whole other theory.
I'm always hesitant to say that because I never know.
Well, you don't know anything. I mean, we don't know anything, right? So, there are a lot of different options for why they could have been best friends. And that don't necessarily mean that, she couldn't have also been sleeping with Harold. But
maybe, but not likely, especially back in those days. I mean, I most people, if you've had sex with my spouse, I'm probably not going to be your buddy. Probably not.
I mean, unless it's an arrangement.
Yeah, and I guess that happens, but I don't know. How often does that happen?
Enough.
Any stats?
I don't know. Do
I know
you
it
know?
happened. No, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was a study done on it once.
Oh,
somewhere.
with government funds, I'm sure. Yeah, I had no doubt. But well, I'll do some googling on that, but not right now. Let's come to our last.
Don't Google that.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Your computer will be forever unclean.
Yeah, true that. Okay, I won't do that. Yeah, there's certain things you really don't want to Google. But our last theory, this is a sexy one. I like this one, which is that Wilson actually was a Soviet mole, and MI5 finally got the goods on him. And rather than have this whole scandal of, the prime minister and all that, they just presented him with this irrefutable evidence, and he quietly resigned and retired, which would have been the way they would
protect his dignity.
Yeah, and
to keep the whole thing under the rug.
Yeah, that totally would have been the way they would have done it. I mean, that is the way they do it. I mean, a lot of those guys were actually caught, and they were more interested in, number one, avoiding scandal and embarrassment, because every time they found themselves a mole in the ranks of MI5 or MI6, well, if it blew up into a big public thing, then that means they lost the confidence of the American cousins, who they were trying to have a cooperative intelligence sharing relationship with. So they tended to sort of try to keep that stuff in the DL and just let somebody quietly retire, rather than actually make a big stink about it.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings us to a guy named Norman John Worthington. Worthington was actually a pseudonym for Harold Wilson. That was the name that was on the file that MI5 had on him. Nice big fat. Well, I don't know if they still have it or not. Yeah, they did. Oh. Yeah, it was such a hot potato. They couldn't. They couldn't have his name on that file. So I assume it was throughout the file. It would have been one of those things where if you sat down and read the file cover to cover,
you'd figured it out.
You would have figured it out. But if at any glance, even looking at a couple of pages, you're not going to figure it out. But it was kept under tight wraps, of course. One of the sources, by the way, as I said, I talked about it earlier, was Spycatcher by Peter Wright.
Mm-hmm.
And which was published in 1987. It was actually banned in the UK right after its publication.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it totally was. But then, it was discovered that they couldn't actually ban it in Scotland. They buy 10 copies for them and their friends, and so eventually they had to just lighten up and let the book be sold everywhere in the UK. But it's a really interesting book. Back to the early days when he was going out and burgling people's flats and planting bugs and stuff like that. It's kind of a cool book, and the way they used to do the old cloak and dagger thing way back in the 50s and the 60s, a lot different from today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but I can recommend that one. But one suspicious connection, of course, I don't know if I mentioned Joseph Kagan, but this was somebody that.
Wait. Just to back up here. So you've explained to us that he had a fake name on his MI5 file.
Yeah, that's Harold Wilson.
We've just talked about Spycatcher, but
that's true. I'm sort of jumping right in.
Yeah, but nothing here is saying why they say he's a mole.
The reason that Worthington, aka Wilson, had been under suspicion is due to his travels, as I think I said earlier, to places like Russia and Eastern Europe, and he had a lot of friends and connections with Eastern Bloc type people.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these friends and contacts had already come to the attention of MI5 already, just separately and independently. So it was kind of inevitable that Wilson was going to come under scrutiny too.
So I think it's only fair that we point out that between 47 and 51, he was the president of the Board of Trade. Part of his job was to go around and meet people of industry in other countries for reasons of trade.
Absolutely. And so it's not necessarily illegitimate.
Right. But, it's not as if he was just like, I'm going to take a vacation to the Baltics.
Yeah. But of course, KGB, one of their specialties is entrapping and blackmailing people. We can assume, but maybe not. We can assume that Wilson was careful about that kind of thing. We gotta hope.
Okay, so So that explains why.
So back to Kagan.
Yeah. So this one particularly suspicious guy was Joseph Kagan, who was a Lithuanian emigre and a successful businessman. But a KGB agent named Oleg Lialin, he worked in place in Britain for a while before he defected, and that's an interesting story. Is his defection in Spycatcher. Because they were running him in place and in Britain, and the pressure was getting to him. He was drinking a lot, and this is not right, but Lialin. One night he got busted for drunk driving by London police, and he was hauled down to the jail. So Peter Wright gets a call at 3 a.m. saying, hey, get to your office and get that special kit out of your safe. And so he had to go down to his office and get this kit. What the kit was this collection of every known antidote for every KGB poison there was. He had to get out of the jail with this, just in case Lee Allen had been poisoned.
Oh,
because
got
they
it.
never figured he was going to get killed in jail by the KGB.
Because it makes him a target. Because now he can't get away.
Yeah,
Got it.
and so anyway, at that point there was no choice; he had to defect. But yeah, another one of those really interesting little stories that he tells. While he was in place, he told MI5 about a friend of his named, I don't know the first name, but his last name was Vigakis. That sound about right? Yeah, okay, Vigakis, Russian name Vigakis. He was KGB also. He was working in the Soviet trade delegation in London, and of course Vigakis told Lee Allen that he was in contact with Joseph Kagan, Wilson's buddy. And so it's...
Wait, what's the connection between? I'm not catching the connection between Kagan and Wilson here.
They were friends and associates. They hung out
Just through common people, or did they have a working relationship? Like, I don't understand how they knew each other.
Yeah, they seem to be like kind of like I'm not sure if they were like really total socializing together best buds, or if it was more of a business relationship. I know that Kagan, for example, did him certain favors, like when he was campaigning, he loaned him an airplane.
Okay.
And actually funded his private office and things like that.
That fleshes out what this quote unquote relationship is. So that's what I didn't understand.
Yeah, they apparently were close in one way or another. Even if they weren't soulmates, apparently Kagan felt it was important to like cultivate this friendship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for his part, Wilson did a little product placement for him. He had a raincoat factory in Leeds. Kagan did, and so Wilson was always wearing his raincoats. So it's product placement, basically.
Was it a Macintosh?
No, it wasn't a Mac.
Okay.
Yeah.
I really wish it had been. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
No, yeah.
So these guys. So there's this whole triad of Soviets that know each other that then know Wilson. Okay.
Yeah. So so obviously, having heard this rumor, MI5 took a big interest in finding out what the relationship between Kagan and Vigakis was, and weren't able to come up with much. Actually, they were looking for some sort of covert communications, but according to Kagan, he was interrogated eventually, and he swore that he only occasionally met Vigakis for chess games. Although, who knows? They were talking in coded language and passing, like secret messages under the table, maybe. But it
or,
left
it was
question.
totally innocent.
They could have been totally innocent, absolutely. It's one of those things, though. I mean, once the suspicion is out there, it's kind of hard to dispel.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. In 1964, this is after Wilson became prime minister. James J. Angleton, you remember him?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, head of counterintelligence for the CIA, came to London to visit MI5, and I don't know if you remember a Yuri Nasenko episode a long ago. I had James J. Angleton. Yeah, okay, same guy.
According to Angleton, everybody was working with the Reds.
Yeah, he was a little paranoid. Yeah, he definitely gave Yuri Nasenko a hard time.
Yeah.
Although there's some other defectors he seemed to take more seriously. Angleton told MI5 that he had a good authority from an unnamed source that Wilson was actually a Soviet agent. And he offered to provide detailed information if MI5 promised to keep all evidence strictly confidential, as in not share it with the government. It stays strictly within MI5.
That's such a weird thing to put down as a requirement.
Well, yeah, I can kind of see it. He probably should have given some reasons, like, well, I don't want you sharing it with ex-politicians because I think there's a mole somewhere in the British government, something like that. And maybe that was it. I don't know. Generally speaking, if your source is already defected, then you don't need to worry so much about protecting your source.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe that says he had an agent in place, or maybe that was him just being a drama queen. I don't know.
Probably that.
He was capable of doing that. There's no doubt about that. So this is a conundrum, of course, because they wanted what he had, but at the same time, the purpose of what they did is to provide intelligence to the politicians who had our governments, right? Otherwise, if it's just for their consumption, so anyway,
yeah,
they turned the deal down, or at least they said they did. There's a general theory out there that these allegations came from a Soviet defector named Anatoly Golitsyn, but actually nobody actually knows really where it came from. Did Angleton make it up? Probably not. Did he get it from Golitsyn or God knows where? Who knows? It was a long time ago. Probably everybody that had knowledge of it is probably dead.
Right,
Might be in a file somewhere.
it could be he put 2 and 3 together and came up with 4.
It could be that
You
too.
know, different bits of information, and he puts them together in one way and decides it points at a certain person.
Yeah.
And that happens all the time in spycraft.
Especially
Well,
when
it
you
has
just
to.
ignore a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that happens too.
That like extra 1 number
Yeah.
from 2 plus 3.
It
Yeah.
works really well in my checking account, it turns
Yeah,
out.
me too.
There's that thing. You got to be very, very careful not to fall prey to that thing that you want to shoehorn everything into the proper theory. You know. Yeah, you got to not fall prey to that. We, of course, at Thinking Sideways, never do that.
Nope.
No, not
Never.
at all.
Not once.
Never have.
Never.
Yeah.
Innocent.
Yeah, but it's an intriguing question for me is whether MI5 really actually turned down that deal. Because actually, wow, that'd be a hard deal to turn down. I'd want to know what he had to say.
Yeah, but the problem is it's not actionable.
Well, it's not, but it can be. It's actionable in a sense. I mean, if you want to, like put out a hit on the guy or something like that, you can always do that. I mean, so it's actionable in that sense. I mean,
Sorry, nobody can see me. I'm rolling my eyes
Yeah, I know.
at the putting out the
Yeah.
hit part.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, okay.
No, actually, what?
Steve's just fed up.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
I know. So we'll never know. But yeah, back to Hugh Gateskill though. Yeah, remember him, the guy who died? Very. He volunteered to die
Of
to make
lupus?
room. To make room for Harold Wilson. Yeah. So he, if you read the wiki page about him, they say the only source for the assassination rumor was the same Anatoly Golitsyn that we were just talking about, and that's actually not true. The actual origin of the story was Gateskill's doctor, who contacted MI5 after he died, and he said he was disturbed by the manner of his death because lupus, that particular kind of lupus, is so rare in temperate climates that he felt there was absolutely no way that Gateskill could have gotten it.
So I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
I did reading on lupus in general, but I didn't catch this particular variant until about 5 minutes after I got here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you, did you ever read to find out if indeed that is true? That it is only occurs in places that have a different climate than Britain?
No, that is true. I mean, although it doesn't
Of that
mean
so you looked up this particular kind of lupus or strain of lupus that he had.
Yeah, it's rare. I mean, it's extremely rare. I mean, I think even in equatorial climates, it's kind of rare. But in a climate like ours, we have a climate very similar to Britain right here.
It's
in
cooler
Oregon.
Yes.
temperature.
Yeah, it's just kind of rare. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's worth mentioning though. Like lupus is not like you can't catch it.
Well,
You can't be given it.
this is a different breed of lupus apparently, but it's like.
But it's not as though somebody could have just injected him with the lupus virus.
Well,
right?
yeah, no, but actually somebody could have injected him with something.
Right. But I think like it's important to say that like if realistically he did actually die of lupus.
No.
Right, which I don't think his doctor is saying no. His doctor is saying it's weird that he got this kind of lupus, but he's not saying he didn't have it.
No,
right?
he had it.
Right,
Definitely had it. So.
But it's also important to note that like somebody couldn't have just injected him with it or like given it to him. That it had to have developed in his own body.
Yeah,
Because it's an
typically.
autoimmune issue.
Yeah,
Exactly.
It's not something that he could have been infected with.
Well, it turns out that the Soviets did experiments on inducing this particular kind of lupus in lab rats.
How'd
And
that go for them?
It actually worked. Yeah, using a certain.
It didn't go so well for the rats.
Yeah, no, the poor rats. Sorry about that, guys.
Interesting. So it
Yeah.
can be induced. This one.
Yeah, apparently.
At least in rats.
Yeah, what Anatoly Golitsyn said, and of course he supposedly was the sole source of this rumor, but not really. According to Peter Wright,
This is the author of Spycatcher.
Peter Wright, the author of Spycatcher, he said that Golitsyn told MI5, and let's remember, he had no idea about the doctor's suspicions. He said that during his last few years with the KGB, he had contacts with Department 13, which is known as the Department of Wet Affairs. And this is the department responsible for planning assassinations. And according to...
This is the Soviet department.
Yeah.
Of course they. Okay.
Of
Of course. it
KGB,
is.
of course. Yeah. He said just before he left KGB, he'd heard that they were planning a high-level political assassination in Europe in order, quote, to get their man into place, unquote.
Which could have been anybody.
Could have been. He didn't know. He didn't actually say which country. He didn't know which country it was planned for. So that's the information they get. So they put those two things together. Okay. So he dies of this really strange and rare disease, and the KGB was planning a hit on some major guy in Europe. So Peter Wright contacted, of course, our buddy James J. Angleton and asked him for information. Angleton dug up a Soviet scientific research paper in which it turns out they had perfected a procedure to induce lupus in lab rats, like I was saying.
At least according to the Soviet paper.
Yeah, according to that paper. Yeah, and...
I want to note, it's according to that paper.
Yeah, according to the paper. I'm assuming that it was true. I'm assuming this... That, yeah.
I'm making... is a Soviet paper that the Western world has gotten their hands on, and we have talked many times about the practice of disinformation, of sending things out there that are totally bogus to mess with your enemy.
Yeah, that's always a possibility. Yeah, I mean that's the whole that whole wilderness of mirrors thing. You know, I mean it's just you never know up from down or right from wrong or anything. I mean. It's kind of crazy, and you can see why it drives so many people to drink. But it's entirely possible. I mean, Wright consulted with one of their MI5 scientists who said it did appear to be possible. And he said that in the 7 years since that paper had been written and the time they spoke, it's possible they had perfected the process to the point where they could, with a single dose or injection, induce lupus in somebody.
Wow.
Yeah, but it does appear that the Soviets, if they did perfect this assassination tool, it does appear they never used it again because MI5 was on the lookout for that. And so that would argue